General Chang, Ambassador Tiao, ladies and gentlemen. Can I be heard? It's okay? It's a great pleasure being here. You know, I was introduced as being one of the members of the board of the Green Growth Institute in Seoul, Global Green Growth Institute. And that is what brings me here. We had a board meeting yesterday, and there is a Global Green Growth Summit going on. I'm particularly pleased that Secretary General Chang and our ambassador have made it possible for me to address a group of business and other academic people interested in India. What I'd like to do is just sort of share my thoughts on where the Indian economy is. I see that they've distributed a paper, which some of you have, which I had written very recently. And I think that gives you in detail my perceptions of our current challenges. This is the time when we are coming to the end of the 11th five-year plan, and we are about to produce the 12th five-year plan, which will begin next year. So actually, China has just outlined their 12th five-year plan a couple of months ago, and ours comes 1 year later. So probably a lot of five-year plans floating around at this time. I think I'd just like to review where we stand, and if people want to ask detailed questions, we can do that. In some ways, we can say that the Indian economy has done really quite well. We started a process of economic reforms in 1991. Actually, some reforms had begun even before then, but the big step to open up the economy and integrate with the world and open up to trade and bring in foreign investment, etc. This was really decided in 1991. India was a slow reformer. We didn't do what in Eastern Europe used to be called the Big Bang reform, shock therapy and things like that. We looked in a particular direction, and we steadily moved towards that direction. And I think one reason for that is very important to understand India. One reason for that is that it's a democratic country. And if you have a country of 1.2 billion people, which is not a homogeneous country, I mean, there are not only different regions, but you know, different languages, virtually all the religions of the world, etc., and a very active democracy, then you have to build a consensus around a direction of change. I mean, you cannot have change coming top down. So I think for these reasons, India's economic reform process took longer than most other countries. If you ask me personally, I think longer than was necessary, but it was an important part of the political process to build a consensus around that change. And I think that one can say that over this period, that consensus has held. We have several different state governments, and you have different parties in power in state governments. Since the economic reforms began, even in the center, different parties and coalitions have been in power. And while these parties often disagree with each other quite a bit, I think it would be fair to say that over time, virtually all of them have essentially moved in the same direction as far as economic policy is concerned. And the economy has actually done quite well in this process. If I look at the recent years, we're probably going to end the 11th plan. This is the last year of the 11th plan. We'll probably end the 11th plan with an average growth rate of 8.2%. And in the 10th plan, we had an average growth rate of about 7.8%. So some acceleration. But I think that the 8.2% during this five-year period, ending in the current year, 2011-2012, is actually quite a remarkable achievement, because this is also the year when we had 2 years of the worst economic crisis that the world has seen. So to do 8.2 in a situation where the global economy had weakened, I think suggests that there is a certain amount of economic resilience that has been built up. and a certain autonomous capacity to grow. And we're now looking into the 12th plan to see what is it that is feasible. The target that we have set as a tentative target, it's not a firm target yet, because this will get firmed up during the year, but the range that we've been asked to look at is between 9 and 9.5%. So really the Planning Commission has been asked that the economy grew at an average of 8.2%. If we hadn't had a global crisis, it would almost certainly have done better than that. And now can we aim at something between 9 and 9.5? We haven't decided what is feasible, but you know, personally I feel that there's not much merit in setting very high targets. It's better to be realistic. And personally, I think that if we can actually plan for a 9% growth for the next 5 years, that would be a very, very substantial achievement. India is still a low-income country, and therefore there's a lot of room for rapid growth simply as part of the process of catching up. In the paper that has been distributed, I indicate what are the many different strengths of the economy. It is now gradually, I mean, they're not different from what you get in many other successful East Asian countries. We're trying to run a market-oriented, open, essentially private sector-based growth strategy, with the government playing an extremely important role. And really the focus in India it's the job of the government to make sure that first of all that the growth is inclusive. I mean, we cannot simply have a growth process which doesn't benefit the large mass of the population. The social support for policies of rapid growth, policies of private sector engagement, etc. The social support for these policies can only come if the growth process is also seen to be inclusive. So that's the phrase we use to really imply that there should be a broad spread of the benefits of growth. We also want to make sure that this growth is actually sustainable. And of course, sustainability is now a critical issue everywhere. And that's what the Global Green Growth Summit is all about. And I think we are looking at the Indian situation to see what is it that we need to focus on especially in order to make sure that the growth process that we want to unleash is not only rapid, but also inclusive and also sustainable. So that's really the broad objective. We feel that the broad policy of remaining an open economy and welcoming foreign investment, this has been well received and has produced good results, and it almost, there's no doubt in my mind that that will continue. And actually, one of the countries with whom our opening up has proceeded very satisfactorily is Korea. We're not only important trading partners for each other, you're certainly a very important trading partner for us. Korea's trade is huge, so India is not that important a trading partner for Korea. But I think looking ahead, it's as a large economy, it will be one of the major sources of growth. We have constantly welcomed investment from Korea into India, and we do have major Korean companies which are present in India and are expanding their presence. And I'm also happy to say that there are Indian companies investing in Korea. It's very important as the process of globalization proceeds that countries actually perceive that this is a two-way process. And of course, they've always said that about trade. You want to import and you also want to export. But it's very good that the same thing is happening in terms of investment. Now, India is looking forward to a very large net investment from Korea. I mean, we are not a capital exporting country. But it's perfectly possible to have a lot of net investment from Korea, which consists of a large amount of gross investment from Korea and some gross investment from India to Korea. And I hope that that process will continue. Of course, the fact that we recently concluded a comprehensive economic partnership agreement lays down the framework for continuing in this line. And I think we have done that not just with Korea, but we have a general look east policy where we have been opening up to countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia generally. India has a comprehensive economic partnership, sort of, they're not called free trade agreements, but they really amount to very substantial preferential trade agreements with ASEAN and with individual countries in ASEAN also. We've completed the discussion with Japan and we have one with Korea. So that's quite a significant opening up to this part of the world. We don't actually have such an agreement with China, but the economy is open and we're seeing investment from China into India and India into China, and trade between China and India is also expanding quite rapidly. So it's a general policy that the economy must remain open and the economy must integrate. Asia is a rapidly growing part of the world. India is a part of Asia. We hope to contribute to Asian growth and also benefit from it. That's basically the policy that we're following. So what are the challenges? I think one of the important things to remember is that when a country does well for a certain period of time, people naturally take a positive view, and that's good. I mean, there's something really positive that one is looking at. But I think as planners, one should also not become complacent. I mean, just because we did well in the last 10 years doesn't mean that we're going to do well in the next 10 years. I think the point I'm trying to make in this paper is that there are examples of countries that did very well and then suddenly hit a constraint. And I think one should look at this problem by asking oneself the following question. It's not enough to say that we will continue the policies that we had before, and if we continue the policies we had before, then we will get the same results that we got before. I mean, there's a sort of a logic to it, and it seems logical, and we are certainly going to continue these policies. There's no doubt about that. But I think we need to ask ourselves that, is that enough? Or do we have to do something extra? And I think the answer is clearly we have to do something extra. And I think there are two reasons why you need to do something extra. And this would be true not just for India, but for every country. And every country has to ask this question. And of course, the answer will be different depending on the country's situation. But the first point is that in the past, we had certain policies, and those policies did quite well for us, and we are going to continue those policies. But in the past, there was a particular international environment. So the question you have to ask is the international environment going to change? Because if the international environment is going to change, then simply continuing the policies that did well last time around may not yield the same results, because the external environment has changed. That's one issue. The second is that, you know, as a country develops and grows and moves to later stages, a lot of internal changes also take place. And I think those internal changes can impose structural constraints, which it is important to identify and do something about. Because you can't just assume that you keep on growing without hitting any constraints. And I think there are constraints that we will face. One of them clearly, which is the three constraints that I worry about, which are listed in the paper. One relates to energy. I mean, that's again not unique to India. It's actually generally true in the world. I mean, fossil fuel supplies are limited and prices are rising. So if we postulate that in the next 10 years, there will be years of rising energy prices, how do we cope with those, that situation of rising energy prices? What can we do domestically to increase our own supplies of energy? And what can we do to bring in new supplies of energy? And these are new challenges that we need to address. Another very major area is water. I think in the Global Green Growth Summit discussions today, the problems posed by water as a constraint were discussed quite a bit. I think that's one area that we need to worry about. And the third is really the whole issue of urbanization. As the country grows, the pace of urbanization increases very substantially. And India is, as yet, a relatively low urbanized environment. You know, in Korea, I mean, 25% of the population lives in Seoul. So the extent of urbanization is immense. That's not the case in India. But even if you took the major cities, the percentage of the population that lives in major cities is actually relatively small. The total urban population in India is about 30%. And we think that within the space of 20 years or so, this could increase from 30 to something like 40 or 45. I mean, this is pretty much what happened in China over the previous 20 years. And India is lagging behind China in terms of per capita income, rates of growth, etc. But as the growth rate picks up, you can see the same change will take place. So a big issue in the growth rate strategy for future will be how do we manage the urban transition. And of course, in addition to these challenges, there's the issue of how to make growth inclusive, how to make sure that the growth process benefits everyone. So let me just spend a few minutes on each of these. First of all, on the issue of inclusiveness. You know, in our view, the most important thing that we have to do to make growth inclusive is to make sure that we have a better, faster growth of agriculture. And we are seeing some results of the efforts we have made. We had targeted about a 4% growth in agriculture in the current plan period, but actually we'll probably end up with 3%, which is better than in the previous plan period because that had gone down to 2%. But it's not as good as what we had wanted. And I think one reason for that is that it takes time for many of the changes that have to be put in place to begin to have effect. Plus, we need to address the water challenge, which I mentioned. So, to some extent, how successful we are in agriculture will depend on how effectively we can meet the challenge of water scarcity. So, I'll come to the water scarcity issue at the moment, but each of these challenges also provides new opportunities. So, I wouldn't view these challenges simply as problems. They are problems, we have to address the problems. But as you address the problems, each problem presents new opportunities. You know, in the case of agriculture, the big new opportunity is that Indian agriculture in future is going to be much less dependent for its growth on food grain and much more on non-food grain crop, horticulture, dairying, fishery, etc. I mean, this is just a normal process of you know, what happens with rising income. Of course, if we were dominantly a non-vegetarian country, then the demand for grain would rise quite rapidly because if you want to eat meat, you have to produce a lot more grain to feed one human being meat than you have to do if he's eating grain himself. But, you know, since a lot more of us are vegetarian, and for health reasons, I predict that around the world a lot more people will become vegetarian. I don't think that the demand for food grain will not grow by more than 2% per year. However, milk and dairy products and horticulture and vegetables, and these things would grow at about 6% or 7% per year. And these products actually involve a huge amount of post-harvest management. Unlike food grain, which is actually non-perishable and it's very easy to market. So we expect a radical transformation in the entire marketing network associated with agriculture. That's a great economic opportunity, both for sort of companies engaged in agricultural marketing, for linking up with farmers in order to produce what is demanded in the market, and also, of course, building an entire logistics industry with refrigerated transport, etc., etc. So this is something that is beginning to happen. We are trying to work with our own state government. Sometimes they have a lot of laws that actually interrupt this process, and that's a very major aspect of the challenges we face in the 12th plan. Let me say a few, and of course, all of this for agriculture requires a lot of bringing in of new practices, and I think we need to move away from the earlier a sort of first generation green revolution agriculture, heavily dependent on fertilizer and pesticides, and move to more sophisticated farming methods that don't depend so much on this. Sort of not necessarily a shift to organic agriculture, but definitely a shift to much more efficient use of these inputs, with a lot of research for varietal improvement, and with the possibilities of climate change occurring around the world. The focus that we have to give on agricultural research to develop the kind of crop varieties that would be suited to meeting the different kinds of stresses that are likely to arise. This is another new area for development. And of course, linked to all this is biotechnology. So these are examples where you see something as a challenge, but to address that challenge, lots and lots of new opportunities open up. And we're hoping that in this area, we will not only see a response from the Indian private sector, but the foreign private sector is also welcome to participate. So that's one set of things. On the water issue, I think that's a very important challenge around the world, because in fact, my view is that water is an even bigger challenge than energy, and I'll come to that. And basically because the supply of water is actually fixed. I mean, India has the same water that we did 10,000 years ago, probably becoming more uncertain with more variability because of climate change. And at the same time, we're not only supporting a growing population, but we're supporting growing GDP. The pure personal need for water is not a big deal, because actually the personal need for water for drinking and washing is only about 3% of the total water we have. But supporting GDP is a huge requirement for water. And with a fixed amount of water, if we grow at 9%, let us say, then anything that grows at 9% will double in 7 years. So 7 years later, we'll have twice as much GDP and the same amount of water, and in another 7 years, we'll have 4 times as much GDP with the same amount of water. So actually, and I think China has faced exactly the same situation, and they're trying in their 12th plan to build into it improved water efficiency. Now here, we see tremendous opportunities in India for improving the efficiency of water use, because in a way the good news is that we use water very inefficiently. But there are some real problems here. One of the reasons that water is used very inefficiently is that somehow people are not really ready to believe that water should be priced. We have in our national water policy, it says that water is precious. We must preserve every drop. But it doesn't say, therefore we should price water to reflect the fact that it's precious. Now, that's fine. And actually, a lot of the NGOs who worry about water, they get very nervous if you start talking about prices. So there's a sort of a tension here that any bringing in of any market considerations leads to a lot of support from the social groups that worry about water. Now, obviously, we have to have more rational pricing of water. We probably cannot rely only on pricing, but that only means you have to have other forms of distributing water rationally. I don't know how to switch this off. Why don't you do something? I think we need to move to a system where, on the one hand, we can increase the storage of water that falls, not just by building big dams. We can do that too, and we need to do some of that, but to avoid runoff and increase water recharge. And frankly, that requires a major effort at watershed management. In the 12th plan, we are proposing to do an estimate, a quantitative estimate of the water balance in each aquifer in the country, using space technology to be able to judge which are the areas where we are getting an unsustainable rate of withdrawal, what are the natural water resources, what do we know about the rainfall. So we get a sense in each aquifer of what the usable water supply is. And based on that, try to create an awareness in the community that this is the water you've got and what is the most efficient way of using it. So I think this will be a big effort that will unroll, and linked to that also is a lot of opportunity in terms of the use of new technology. Equally, control of pollution of water sources is now a major requirement. I mean, we are not doing nearly as much as we should in order to control water pollution. I mean, the most obvious form of water pollution is, of course, the lack of sewerage possibilities in our cities. And I mean, sewerage is a very easy thing to do in the sense that it takes some money, but it's really one of the oldest forms of human technologies to control. But part of the problem is that if you have an unplanned growth of a city with lots of slums that are not actually meant to be there, basically the municipal services cannot extend services to these areas, because by extending service to these areas, you're actually regularizing the area. So you get a very funny situation. I mean, the slums are there. We all know that we're not going to remove 10 million people, but somehow we're not zeroing in on the fact that, look, this is a fact of life now. Let's work towards providing a proper sewerage facility. I think we'll just have to do that, and that will involve a major amount of investment in urban areas. So India should be very actively looking for anyone who has water cleaning, water reusing, water management technology for urban areas to sell. And reuse of industrial water is also something that India is not doing enough of. And given the lack of water, all those technologies for recycling of industrial wastewater, that has to come also in a big sort of way. Now, some of these things are only going to come in if government regulation forces industry to do this. I mean, it's not going to happen spontaneously, because if you don't force industry to recycle, why should they recycle? So we will need to bring these things which, I mean, everybody has known about, but they've not actually been built into the city planning or state level planning, have to be brought on board. So here again, it's a challenge, but linked to the challenge, lots and lots of opportunity. Let me now come to energy. I said earlier that the problem with water is that people somehow don't feel that water should be priced. I just want to give one figure that will give you a sense of what the problem is, because our irrigation policy is based on the assumption that the government will build the irrigation system, but the water water charges will pay for both operation and maintenance. The actual fact is that water charges only pay for about 15% of operation and maintenance. So if we keep to the same policy, we need something like a 6-fold increase in water charges from an irrigation system in order to actually get to an optimal level. And one of the problems, by the way, is that because irrigation water is hugely underpriced, the people who are using water from the ground, they say that, look here, we are putting the capital equipment at our own cost, which is the pump. But since you're underpricing water for the canal fellows, you should actually not charge us for the electricity. And it's very, I mean, if you just look at it as an isolated problem, it's absurd. But when you hear it in the field, you say, why shouldn't you subsidize my electricity if you're subsidizing that fellow's canal water? And that's a very difficult question to answer. So, the politics of it is actually quite complicated, as the economics is complicated. I'm mentioning these things simply to say that very often people sort of think it's a simple matter. It's not a simple matter. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And I think what we're trying to do is make people aware that this is causing a big problem. Of course, what's happening is that with the electricity being grossly underpriced for agricultural purposes, you're getting an excessive draw of water with groundwater levels going down. And when groundwater levels go down, then the water also becomes toxic with lots of chemical pollution. and creates all sorts of problems. So these are the water-related issues. Now I come to energy. Energy, you have one big advantage. People expect to pay for energy. I mean, and you know, while there's always an argument that you have to subsidize the poor, by and large, people are willing to pay for energy. But I think what we face, and indeed all countries face, is that in the next 10 years or so, we're moving into a period where, on the one hand, fossil fuels are going to become scarce, particularly if growth in the world as a whole continues. Now, I know that growth in the industrialized world is going to slow down, but we are hoping that growth in the emerging markets is actually going to accelerate, when otherwise we'll never develop. So if growth in the emerging markets is going to accelerate, if India and China and other developing countries are going to grow more rapidly, then basically there'll be a huge pressure on what is known of fossil fuels. And quite apart from the fact that fossil fuels are polluting, and we shouldn't be using as much of them, there won't be that much of them to use. So any reasonable assumption about fossil fuel prices suggests that the price is going to move up. Now, of course, fossil fuels are not the only fuels. There are renewables, and people can be quite optimistic about, you know, the ability to use renewable energy. And certainly in the last 10 years, if you look at Europe, the extent of use of renewable energy has certainly increased, and we've not even started to exploit that potential yet. So in India, we, like other countries, what we're doing is giving a big thrust to renewable energy, but renewable energy is more expensive. I mean, we have a reasonable program to develop solar energy in India, but right now the cost difference between solar energy and, let's say, coal-based energy, I mean, whereas energy from coal costs about 2 rupees plus per unit, solar energy until about 3 years ago used to cost 15 rupees per unit. But you know, in the recent last 2 or 3 years, we've done a lot of competitive bidding for new plants, which we give a subsidy to. And the cost has come down from 15 to 12, but 12 is still much higher than 2 plus. Now, what everybody believes, and I think this has happened in the past, that when you invest in a new technology, not just one country, but the whole world is investing in this technology, then as has happened with many new technologies, the unit costs will come down. And I've seen projections which show that sometime around 2019 or so, the unit cost of solar energy, which is falling, will equalize with the unit cost of conventional energy, which is rising. But this equalization will occur at a higher energy price. So one of the critical things we have to plan for is to pass on the higher energy prices into the system. And this is not an easy issue to put across, because, you know, most people tend to think that if suddenly if oil prices were to collapse to $40 a barrel, and you ask people, would India benefit? And the answer would be, of course we would benefit. Oh, thank you. Of course we would benefit. But that doesn't mean that if oil prices double, we should keep them low in order to derive a benefit. But in the public mind, the argument that when oil prices rise, your ability to retain a fast growth capability depends on being able to pass on the price rise and to absorb it. And we're currently moving towards a system of greater decontrol over energy prices. We've decontrolled petrol, gasoline completely. We are in the process of doing the same thing with diesel. That is the declared policy. We haven't actually implemented it, but many of us have been saying publicly that it's time to do that. And I think we also have an issue on coal, because, you know, one of the problems is that coal price internationally will be linked to the petroleum price, and it has been rising. We have large reserves of coal, but our ability to exploit that coal is also limited. because a lot of our coal is directly under most of our forests. So mining this coal is going to be tough. So not only we have environmental issues to resolve, our own estimate is that we will need to be importers of coal. And if you're importing at a higher and higher price, the coal price also needs to adjust to global prices. And along with this, we need to build as much as we can on the renewable side, because India has very high potential on solar energy. The total insolation or whatever solar radiation we get is quite high. And in many parts of the country, there is scope for wind energy also. These are all areas where we need to be participating in the process of expanding technology. And so I hope that Korean companies that are interested in solar energy or interested in wind energy, etc., will come in and look at the possibilities for investment in India. So these urbanization, water, agricultural growth, energy, these are the things that I see as the big challenges. And frankly, I think this is what government should be concentrating on. In my view, if government does these things, and many of these things are basic infrastructure. I mean, of course, there's other aspects of infrastructure also, like ports and roads and airports. But really, the responsibility of government should be in the area of the energy, transport, urbanization, infrastructure, and also health and education, which is a basic social requirement where we need to spend a lot more money. Now, if we can do that, I think we have a very strong private sector, which is really quite capable of taking on the rest of the challenge. I mean, in the longer run, you know, economic growth really depends on a supply of high human skills, because the rest is all sort of available from somewhere or the other. And I think India is well positioned from that perspective, because the demographics are such that China probably is peaking now with its supply of its labor force, the total population in the working age area, in the working age region, will slowly decline. In India, this particular population will keep rising for the next 20 years. So virtually all the industrialized countries are going to see a decline in the supply in the working age population. China too will see a decline. India will still see an increase. And I think if we can provide education, and that is actually happening, and we can basically have a growing population with a basic educational and skill capability, then quite frankly, India's growth prospects for producing goods for itself and producing goods for the world are really quite favorable. So this is really how we see things, and I would say that, you know, you can never predict what's going to happen, but I think that the bottom end of our range of growth is 9%, and I think we should at least be targeting that. We'll know what we think is feasible. It will be a big challenge, but I think the chances are, based on past performance, that we've already, having done 8.2, we should be able to move over a 5-year period at least to something like 9, or maybe a little short of that, I can't be sure. But this is really how we perceive India's prospects. And I think in all of this, our assessment is that we probably need to plan on a net capital inflow into India of something of the order of 2.5% of GDP per year. That's not very much. I mean, at 15 billion or so being 1% of GDP, there's a net capital inflow of something like 40 billion or a little less than that per year. To invest in a growing economy does not seem to me to be excessive. I mean, the world needs somewhere to put its capital, and the logical thing to do would be to put its capital where growth prospects are high, because that's where capital will earn a better rate of return. And I think India is a past performance and current prospects, we hope will make it look like a good destination for anyone wanting to invest in. So let me leave that thought with those of you who are deeply involved in Korean business or involved in business schools, so you can tell your students about the prospects and perhaps take a few questions. If